Hey everyone, welcome back to the OnBase podcast. I'm your host, Chris Moody, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Eric Feige to talk about winning with go-to-market strategy, aligning digital goals, stakeholders, and innovations for sustainable revenue growth. Eric, thanks for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Chris, it's my pleasure.
Well, it's good to see you again. We were just together at the Forrester event. So one question we didn't get to talk about in person that we love to start every podcast episode with is to talk a little bit about your journey. What led you to what you're doing today?
Gosh, there's a lot here. Back in the early days of the internet, I was a venture capital backed founder of my own company. Big focus on internet services and cloud, as we know now, cloud related services for business to business collaboration. So what gets me to today is that had I enough capability, I would have been a serial entrepreneur with exits, and we'd be talking about I'm an angel investor. But I had a very good run. But what I learned was really the practical know-how of digital transformation by doing it from scratch as a VC-backed company, and very clearly, here's the back of the napkin idea. Now put it into motion. Get it to market as quickly as possible. And I've used that throughout my career. In professional services, I helped architect and build out Deloitte's first digital platform after my VC-backed platform, and brought a lot of the know-how to a big professional services giant like Deloitte. I've done the same thing for KPMG as a head of digital there, and made a pivot to regulated industries and financial services, where I've been a head of digital for companies like JP Morgan and Prudential Financial across a couple of different divisions.
No, that's great. That's great. And one thing I'm curious about, you talked about serial entrepreneur and all the different roles. It's giving you visibility into a ton of different areas where you could take digital transformation and drive revenue. You could improve almost any aspect of the business. I'm curious what drove you to focus on go-to-market strategy, because many may argue that's one of the most challenging of all things businesses have to figure out.
Boy, that's a softball question, Chris, because I love it. Because in my experience, when we say Demandbase is a go-to-market platform and that there's a go-to-market strategy, no one functional department can go it alone. What we do know is that you need a P&L owner who's essentially an executive sponsor, a general manager that covers a few different areas. But to go to market successfully, clearly you need to have marketing and communications, a content, brand, and positioning strategy. What's our broad messaging at a macro level? And then at a micro level, we start getting into sales and sales enablement or field marketing with a clear understanding of who's in the buying committee, what are their different personas, beyond the brand messaging, what's really going to relate to them the most, so that they can really get their head around what might be a complex offering. So requires an executive sponsor who has responsibility for multiple divisions or functions, certainly marketing communications, inclusive of digital marketing, sales and sales enablement, which gets to, the folks in the field, BDRs, quota carrying account executives, and other aspects of sales, technology and data. Sometimes data can reside in other areas. And then in the regulated industry space, we always see the control functions, and that's legal, risk, compliance. How do you move to market, go to market compliantly, following the right industry norms and practices?
I love that. And I can hear the passion in your voice. And you said the last question was a softball question. This one's even a bigger softball question for you based on the passion that I'm hearing. Setting realistic digital transformation goals. I can tell that that's something that inspires you and gets you up in the morning. Why are so many organizations terrible at that process?
I've seen this in action. I'll unwind back. I'll go back to when I raised capital at the seed stage and at the Series A stage. Unless you've actually done this as an entrepreneur, you don't really know that this kind of how it works. But often they'll tranche, or they'll give you the capital in not all at once, but you got to prove it out. So I was trained in that kind of approach of, you're going to market, you're building a new product, you're launching it, you're marketing it, you're trying to sell it and service it, but we're only going to give you enough capital that you can prove out that it's working. And that is why so many entrepreneurial-led fintech, insurtech, health tech seem to move much more quickly because they're very practical and judicious with how they go to market with technology, with data, with platforms, and so forth. What I've seen firsthand from some of my bigger brand employers is they look at the CapEx budget cycle that only comes around once every, let's just say, 10 years or so in a big transformation project. And rather than breaking down the roadmap into what's achievable and thinking of a maturity curve of what can you deliver that raises you up a level on a maturity curve, allows you to then have a new foundation to then grow from there and grow from there. Too often the big brands with, the white shoe consultants, as they talk about it, put together these big business cases that are way too big and ultimately become impractical. Impractical because it becomes too much of a bit of a land grab, and the politics and organizational parts come into play of maybe one of those functional heads wanting to take on too much outside of their expertise because they want to be the leader and executive sponsor that drives the digital transformation forward. We see this a lot with IT executives and their global systems integrators, where they get together and they kind of make the big bet on a singular technology stack or a singular technology vendor to do everything. And what we know from practical experience, and we know from a lot of the industry analysts, that just doesn't work, nor is it going to work going forward. What you need to do is orchestrate not only within the functional departments that we talked about, but we need to orchestrate data and the marketing technology. And this is where Demandbase is core as a go-to-market orchestration engine.
Yeah, perfect segue there. I can tell you've done podcasts before. I do want to dig in a little more on that orchestration and proving things out. So you hit on that both in the context of getting more money if you're an entrepreneur, and that's something that you have to accomplish. But I know for everyone listening, if it's not about getting that next round of funding or the next gate to get the next round of money, it is about quarterly bonuses or hitting our objectives. You just hit on the importance of tools like Demandbase, and you talked a bit about revenue growth earlier in some of your answers. How have tools like Demandbase and the evolution that they've had helped us shape the way we go about approaching revenue growth or stakeholder alignment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, Demandbase's evolution's really unique and interesting, because when you put the Demandbase tag, you're kind of in the digital data analytics and measurement world. When you're in outbound campaigns and messaging through display networks, you're in the ad tech space. When you start working on personalized messaging and content, you're in the marketing communications, content development, content supply chain space. And then when we start looking at sales enablement and really AI best, next best actions for salespeople, for SDRs, for field marketers, you're starting to take all these different pieces, that different functional groups. And what we talked about just moments earlier is that the power and benefit is to collaborate, to get those cross-functional groups of content, of measurement, of AI, of sales enablement to work together. So Demandbase, more than many technology partners that we work with, is well positioned to get those different stakeholders collaborating much more effectively. And this gets to some of the process redesign or changing of people's job description, is to tell the digital data analytics, hey, you're not just measuring account-based traffic on a website. You need to work with the content management team on informing them and helping them with perhaps AI generated content development based on what we see on your intent keywords in your highest priority accounts. Right. So you're starting to integrate the systems, the data, but more importantly, the insights and the communications between departments so that you can grow. And when you create this virtual cycle of the system working and the pipeline growing as a result of a go-to-market team using the tools, not only Demandbase, but others at their disposal, it really creates this notion of scale, of growth at scale that doesn't necessarily require more bodies, right? More labor. But it could use better tuning of the system. It could use a greater media budget. It could use more executive education with the ELT, the executive leadership team, to show them this new scaled growth mechanism that should be foundational for the following quarter, the following year, and for years to come.
That's great. Talking about scale makes me think about the huge initiative of setting those digital transformation business goals and knowing that it really can touch every single team in an entire organization and probably should. What framework or approach do you recommend for organizations to start with to come up with the right goals to make sure that I go to Goldilocks a lot, right? Like not
Perfect.
too hot, not too cold, right in the middle. So not too big, not too small, but making sure that we're impacting all the right things.
Absolutely. There's a common framework of 4 or 5 key goals or OKRs that most organizations have, right? And I won't go through all of them, but to give you an idea, it's top line revenue growth. How can we grow at a rate that shows a hockey stick type of growth as opposed to linear growth, right? How can we innovate, which gets a little squishy. We're an innovative company, and that's doing things differently than way you've done it in the past and taking calculated risks. So it's changing your risk profile and showing evidence of embarking on innovation projects. And then to simplify, doing more with less. Gosh, we're being more innovative. We're showing a path to growth, but we're doing it without a huge budget because in certain cycles, particularly for certain functional heads like CMOs and marketers, budgets are tight and the ability to garner more resources or budget is hard to do. So those can be at opposite sides of the equation. And so when we set those goals, we say, well, let's talk to the different executive sponsors that functionally would be involved, right? The control function, sales, marketing, technology, data, a P&L owner of some sort, and get them to prioritize what is it for the next quarter or two. Let's force rank them because we need to free up some of that budget to do more with less so that we can show how that growth and that beginning of that hockey stick model is going to move more quickly. So generally those 4 or 5 goals, force ranking, getting the executive team of sponsors and cross-functional leaders to align and agree that doing things innovatively are quite important, but we don't want to do the moonshot if at the same time our budgets are really constrained right now, because those just don't equate. But doing a calculated risk that shows how we can forego the expense of a new sales development rep because we're going to do more field marketing through a go-to-market platform shows us an example of following those goals in a more meaningful way and then learning from it and then reevaluating quarter to quarter and year to year.
Perfect. Okay, so let's fast forward 3 months, 6 months, whatever interval you want to use there and talk about alignment. We know that there's difficulty even in the beginning phase of getting everyone on the same page, make sure we're not on the extremes as you were hitting on. I've long since believed that marketing has always been a huge problem for organizations. We don't talk enough about the work that we do and communicating internally. What are the key steps that leaders should take to make sure that every single team is on the same page during a transformation initiative?
Yeah. There's following change management methodologies and being very upfront and very direct. And then there's also what is a complementary approach, which is a head fake. It's doing things a little bit direct and in front with your key stakeholders that need buy-in, but also doing some covert maneuvers to show and prove out and look backward and say, hey, look, that really worked. So Chris, what I'm getting at is, regarding Demandbase as an example, I always think it's beneficial, depending on who the Demandbase buyer is to somehow get the whole bundle or get the whole vision with the orchestration, with some allocation of a reasonable media spend, even if they're just starting out with 1/3 of the Demandbase functionality. So getting the organization to have more entitlement that they can use gives a partner or consultant like me more benefit to say, hey, look, you don't need to go through a new procurement cycle with Demandbase, let's say. They've given you some tools and some entitlements so that we can run a best practice program out of the gate. We like to call those beacon projects, not so much minimal viable products or MVPs, which means that you're stripping out functionality, but a beacon really illuminates and lights the way forward of what's possible.
Yeah, that's perfect, Eric. And this actually could be building on the beacon programs, because my brain is going to the huge initiatives and the importance of establishing milestones, or the beacons. And even within that, we know that it's very important to show quick wins and have some of those small impactful wins to build confidence, especially with something like account based, as you get into account based experiences, because closed won revenue is ultimately lots of folks' goals, right? Like they're going to say, we got to get revenue. So what's your approach to think about how to best structure some of the small wins to prove that it's working and build confidence as we work towards the bigger goals?
Yeah, we really like, as a partner, as a Demandbase partner who can operate strategically and then execute campaigns, this notion of a 90, 120-day account-based digital transformation project that touches on what we talked about, which is beyond marketing or beyond sales. Let's find an executive leadership team member who can, it's not a lot of investment, but a proven investment that's going to require at least a couple of meetings to set up a charter. What are our business goals? What's the target audience or segment? Let's agree on what are the top 100 accounts. And I use 100 because we want to get statistically significant with a target list in a defined subsector. Working with one of our mutual client organizations, we're looking at asset managers for a certain type of banking technology or back office technology product. And the target was, let's get 100 asset managers that can benefit from this type of product. 100 is useful because then we can interrogate the executive leadership team and say, well, what are the adjacent or similar lookalike types of audiences in this beacon project, 90, 120-day project? Should we cast a bigger net and maybe go from 100 to 150 targets and start looking at some different types against this set of intent keywords? So that'll serve as the basis for having a really great strategy, having our defined audience of accounts, grouping of accounts, be a little bit flexible so we can generate some insights, maybe some untapped opportunities with adjacent segments. We'll work with the client marketing, the CMO's marketing team on their brand standards and do a little bit of very rapid testing of messaging to what is, in your language, a buying committee set of audiences within those 150 accounts. And then we'll, figure out what's an appropriate media budget and how do we create a landing page or microsite experience that is basically to be turned on within a week or two of kicking off this project and running engagement that we can measure both on-site and off-site, understand and tune the keywords appropriately, and really refine our messaging and develop insights, CX insights. And then ideally, what we're doing in the first couple of weeks is defining against those business goals, what are meaningful conversion steps that we can track. And our goal is to go as aggressively as we can to get a level of engagement with those 150 or more accounts with certain audiences or roles against a set of keywords that's driving engagement, that's starting to populate the pipeline in the CRM tools and is showing some level of traffic and conversion to booking a meeting or to downloading the white paper and scheduling a consultation, those types of keywords. But again, that is a new type of go-to-market program that has multiple digital channels. It uses AI. It uses data, not a ton of data, but the right data that is cleaned and integrated or orchestrated and involves multiple groups, including the control functions, marketing, sales, and ideally a change agent who's an ELT member, an executive leadership team member who can say, hey, this is great because we're seeing that there's some scale here that gives us that scale growth, where if we do more of it systematically and our competitors maybe are tackling too much or too complex or maybe just within silos, they're going to end up being the winners with this type of digital transformation go-to-market program.
Awesome. I love that, Eric. And you mentioned AI, so we can do the green check mark that this is a real podcast episode in 2025. I will ask one more question about AI, though. I'm curious how you think AI is going to change account-based go-to-market?
Absolutely. So I've had many a late night beer and cocktail conversation around, gosh, do you remember when everyone was very excited about blockchain? And then it ended up being crypto kind of, or the metaverse. Everything was the metaverse, these huge valuations. And so when we look at AI, Demandbase has always had AI, as far as I can tell, in your product for a long, long period of time. So we like that because natively what you have in the demand-based platform gives the end user a lot of value to get a readout, to get suggested talking points prior to a meeting, to structure meaningful cheat sheets based on intent keywords and what we're discovering. So that's useful. But to get to the heart of your question, I think there's a lot of AI confusion that's going to continue in 2025, 2026. What we're going to see are a lot of executives scratching their heads saying, I'm not getting the business benefit. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of pontification. There's a lot of IT and data led purchases of technology that doesn't get utilized. But within Demandbase, you're a perfect proving ground for some of the AI tools outside of the ecosystem. And what I mean by that is increasingly we see CMOs and marketing communications professionals really embracing the notion of AI supported content generation, right? Of using an API and large language models to create new content in a content supply chain that can get out to market at a granular, more meaningful and relevant level. And Demandbase and ABM gives you that essentially conduit to test out, is this new AI generated content that is produced outside of Demandbase through a variety of different tools? How do we market test it? How do we ensure that it's converting more effectively than, the former journalist who's been writing copy and doing it, single source without any assistance. Well, Demandbase gives us that conduit, not only with the delivery mechanism, but the measurement as well, to be able to prove, gosh, when we have more content in the supply chain, when it is using the AI rules to understand not only the account specifics, but it's ingesting keywords, it's ingesting audience profiles or persona detail. The notion of orchestration into other tools like marketing automation and CRM make it that much more rich. We're really getting hyper personalized with AI tools that marketing communications folks use, with Demandbase as a conduit for both delivery, measurement, and conversion, where your go-to-market leader, your CMO, your head of sales, your content compliance people see it coming together to prove out that it works. So that would be one example, Chris, where I think, like in previous times, relying on a single vendor for AI or for a digital experience platform, those are examples where that's never worked. And companies really spend a lot of money and incur a lot of heartache when they look for the business results. If we look at best fit and uses of AI, in this case, AI for marketing, communications, and content development in the field, through a go-to-market platform, you start bringing these tools together and proving that it works. I think those are positive, very practical uses of AI, both within the Demandbase platform and with adjacent related platforms.
Awesome. Well, Eric, look, you've made it to the lightning round. So this is the end of our episode. We have a few quick hitters. They can be very fast answers. You don't have to give us the longer description here. The first, this is a hard question. The single biggest, so one, what is the single biggest challenge in B2B sales today?
Change management. I think the single biggest issue is that when we look at B2B organizations, they tend, just use asset management as an example. There's a tried and true way of doing it. And the heads of sales, internal wholesalers, external wholesalers, intermediaries or advisors, other folks that are rewarded, they have historically been so handsomely rewarded for sales that it's difficult to introduce alternatives that could be potentially disruptive to, the cash cow of the B2B sales in the old way of doing it. So the change management here would be, how do you introduce a new way of doing things, but also looking at your comp plans, at your reward systems, at your job descriptions in a meaningful way, particularly when your B2B organization is predisposed to not want to let in new innovation that challenges the way they've always essentially been comped on B2B sales.
Awesome. What about tools and technology? What are your favorite tools or tech that you're using today?
Gosh, I like this notion of composability. So composability is this notion, the way we look at it at my firm VShift is taking what's otherwise complex and generally all where companies bought most of the technology under a single vendor, and we decouple it or we break it apart into its parts or modules. And then for a digital experience platform, you can compose it together. What we see is, hard costs within organizations. You could do 20% the cost of the alternative of working with big vendor and big global systems integrator by componentizing and reassembling the user experience, separating the user experience level from an AI level, from a content level to an API level. And so this notion of composability, we're really quite excited about because we recognize that there's a lot of pressure to bring down tech debt, do things faster, cheaper, more effectively. And modularizing or containerizing technology has always proven out to be much more effective than trusting a big vendor or your centralized IT department to handle it all for you.
Awesome. What about good reads? Favorite book, blog, newsletter, podcast? What inspires you today?
Gosh, I'm going to have to look. I got to tell you, it's not so current, but I enjoy the audio podcast version of the Beastie Boys book. I'm here in the New York area. I'm of the age that I knew a lot of characters like those guys. And the audio is, the chapters are read by some really phenomenal people. It's super entertaining. And I think it's a good lesson in taking risks, having freedom, expressing yourself in a way that I think more business people should do.
Outstanding answer. Shout out Brass Monkey. That's still one of my favorite songs. Yeah. And Intergalactic. I mean, the new stuff also, it's all really good. So what about good people? Who inspires you?
Gosh, from good people, it's very difficult, Chris. We've got a super difficult climate here in the United States right now, politically. So I think we're seeing kind of the worst of many people right now until we see the best. I do like those business leaders that are taking a stand for their employees, those business leaders that are showing courage to bullying. I think what inspires me are what are not the celebrity CEOs, but the stiff-spine CEOs that are taking a stand. And I think they will, they'll be the heroes of the future when their business, not only survives this time of volatility, but really thrive because they stuck to their guns. They knew that their people were important. They knew that, diversity of thought and of ideas was really important. So that's my answer.
Yeah, 10 out of 10, no notes. And this is the easiest question and most important of all, Eric. It's the very last one. How can everyone get in touch with you after this episode?
So after this episode, probably the easiest way would go to my LinkedIn profile. It's first name, last name, EricFeige at linkedin.com. That's probably the easiest way. You'll see that I'm at VShift. If you like our ideas and insights, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter as well.
Outstanding. Well, it's been a pleasure today, Eric. Thanks for joining me.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.